The rain fell like confession that night, cold, relentless, washing over the marble angels that guarded the gates of St. Augustine Cemetery. A black umbrella trembled in the wind as a woman stood before a grave that bore no name, just a date, and a single phrase etched in stone. He gave the world everything except mercy. Her name was Maria Rizzo. Once she had been the queen of the underworld. Now she was just a ghost visiting another. Her gloved hand brushed the tombstone, and the world around her seemed to fade into silence, until only memory remained. You see, Maria never meant to walk into the dark. It was love that led her there. Love wrapped in silk, drenched in danger, whispered in the voice of a man who commanded empires with a glance. His name was Vincent Rizzo, and to those who feared him, he was the devil dressed in a suit. But to her, he was warmth in the cold, the promise of forever. The story doesn't begin in the graveyard. It begins decades earlier, in a neighborhood that smelled of espresso and rain, Little Palermo, 1920s Brooklyn. The streets there were alive, pulsing with old country dreams and American hunger. Laundry lines swayed between brick tenements, children played stickball in the alleys, and on Sundays, the sound of church bells blended with the laughter spilling from the bakeries. Maria was 17 then, a girl with olive skin and eyes that seemed to see both the beauty and the sorrow of the world. Her father, Antonio Russo, owned a small tailor shop on the corner of Belmont and 8th. He worked with quiet hands, stitching suits for men who wore them like armor. She never knew it then, but many of those suits belonged to gangsters, men who carried pistols under their jackets and rosaries in their pockets. Her mother died young, leaving Maria to take care of her little brother, Nico. Life was simple, small. Every dream she had was stitched between the seams of her father's work. But fate, as it always does, had different plans. The first time she heard Vincent Rizzo's name was in whispers. A customer had mentioned him. The young boss from the docks, the one who doesn't blink when he kills. It was said he ran the unions, the liquor shipments, the gambling dens that never closed. But Maria didn't believe in monsters. Not yet. Then came that night. The night everything changed. It was the summer of 1932. The air hung thick with heat and jazz. The Mirage Club had just opened downtown, a place of velvet curtains and forbidden gin. Maria was there only by accident, working as a seamstress for the club's new singer. She'd been sent to adjust a gown, nothing more. But as the lights dimmed and the band began to play, her eyes were drawn to the corner booth where Vincent Rizzo sat. He didn't look like the devil. He looked like the kind of man who owned the room without trying to. Crisp black suit, slicked hair, a diamond tie pin that caught the light just right. Around him sat his men, hulking figures with faces carved from stone. But it was Vincent who drew every gaze. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. When their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. For a moment it wasn't noise and smoke and shadows. It was two souls colliding under the spell of a song. He smiled, slow and deliberate, and lifted his glass in her direction. She froze, heart pounding. Then, before she could look away, he beckoned her over. She should have said no. She should have left. But curiosity, that softest form of danger, pulled her forward. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked when she finally stood before him. She shook her head, nervous. "I believe in work, Mr. Rizzo." He smiled at that. "Smart girl. But sometimes fate doesn't ask permission." His voice was smooth, almost tender, but there was something in his eyes, a weight, an old sadness. Maria would remember that look for the rest of her life. That night, he didn't touch her, didn't even ask her name. He just told her, "We'll meet again." And she left the club feeling like she'd stepped out of a dream she couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks, and the world kept spinning. But something had changed in her. She found herself glancing at the newspaper headlines about gangland shootings, liquor raids, corrupt politicians, and each time she saw the name Rizzo, her heart stuttered. One evening, she returned home to find her father talking in hushed tones with two men in dark coats. The air smelled of cigar smoke and fear. They wanted Antonio to make suits for the boss's men. When Maria realized who the boss was, her stomach turned. Vincent Rizzo. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about his eyes, his voice, the way he'd said, fate. She hated herself for it. But love doesn't come like a thief. It comes like a storm. A week later, he appeared outside her father's shop. No entourage, no bodyguards, just him, standing under the flickering streetlight with an umbrella in his hand. "Walk with me," he said. And somehow she did. They walked along the East River, where the city lights shimmered across the black water. He told her about his childhood, the son of an immigrant dock worker, raised in poverty, clawing his way up through the corruption of prohibition. "The world doesn't give," he said. "It takes. I just learned to take back." Maria saw the steel in him, but also the boy he once was, the one who had nothing but hunger and rage. She should have turned away then, but she didn't. She saw in him a reflection of her own longing to escape the smallness of life, the quiet suffering. When he took her hand, it wasn't gentle, it was claiming, and she let him. By autumn, their secret meetings became regular. The city around them whispered, "Vincent's got himself a girl now." The press called him the gentleman king, a crime lord with class and charm. Maria didn't see the empire yet, only the man who made her feel seen. But in every love story written in blood, there's a moment when innocence dies. That moment came the night Maria saw Vincent's men drag a man into the alley behind the Mirage. She'd followed Vincent after an argument, jealousy, curiosity, maybe both. She watched from the shadows as Vincent spoke softly to the trembling man, then nodded once. A gunshot echoed through the night. He didn't flinch, didn't even look back. Maria's heart broke that night, not from fear, but from realization. She was in love with a man who could take a life as easily as lighting a cigarette, and the terrifying truth was, she couldn't stop loving him. The rain began again as she walked home, the city whispering secrets in the dark. Somewhere deep inside her, something shifted. A part of her innocence fell away, and in its place grew something colder, acceptance, maybe even fascination. She would see him again and again, until love itself became her cage. But for now, as thunder rolled across the skyline, Maria Rizzo was still just a girl standing at the edge of a storm, unaware that it would soon swallow her whole. Because love in Vincent Rizzo's world was never free. It was a contract signed in blood. Brooklyn in the 1930s wasn't a place for the weak. The streets were alive with hustlers, dreamers, and devils who wore suits instead of horns. The Great Depression had drained the life out of the city, but in the darkness, men like Vincent Rizzo found opportunity. Where others saw poverty, he saw power. Where others prayed for bread, he bought the bakery. And while the city struggled to breathe, Vincent Rizzo learned how to choke it, slowly, gently, with a smile. Maria saw his empire take shape piece by piece. It started at the docks. Vincent had grown up there, back when he was just another dock worker's son hauling crates for a few coins. But by 1930 he owned the docks outright. The longshoremen who once cursed his name now whispered it like a prayer. He controlled the unions, the shipments, the flow of contraband liquor that poured in from the Caribbean under the cover of night. Prohibition had made millionaires out of murderers, and Vincent was no exception. His warehouses stretched along the riverfront, camouflaged by legitimate businesses, shipping firms, produce suppliers, textile mills. Behind those walls, barrels of whiskey and crates of champagne lay hidden, ready to be moved at the snap of his fingers. Maria would sometimes visit the docks, escorted by his men. They treated her like royalty. She'd walk between the rows of crates, watching the workers nod respectfully as Vincent passed. To her it was intoxicating, the power, the control, the way he commanded silence with nothing more than a look. He'd tell her, "This city doesn't run on laws, Maria. It runs on fear. And the man who controls fear controls everything." She wanted to believe there was more to him than that. That behind the sharp suits and sharper words, there was still a trace of the boy who once stole bread for his mother. But every passing month that boy seemed to fade, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. The turning point came with the Castellano deal. There was another family, one that had ruled parts of Brooklyn long before Vincent's rise, the Castellanos. They controlled gambling and smuggling on the east side, and their patriarch, Don Rocco Castellano, was a man who didn't share power easily. But Vincent was expanding fast, too fast, and eventually their territories overlapped. Maria still remembered the night he told her about the meeting. They were at the Rizzo estate, a sprawling mansion tucked away in Staten Island. The chandeliers gleamed like stars above the marble floors. She was seated by the fire, sewing a rip in his cuff when he said quietly, "Tomorrow, I'll end a war before it begins." "By peace?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. He looked up from his glass of bourbon. "By control." The next evening, he met with Rocco Castellano at the Monarch Hotel downtown. They dined, they drank, they shook hands. By sunrise, the Castellanos were gone, wiped from the map. The newspapers claimed they'd fled to Cuba. Maria knew better. That was the night Vincent stopped being a player. He became the king. With the Castellanos gone, the city opened itself to him like an unlocked vault. Speakeasies, brothels, gambling dens, all of them fell under his shadow. His men multiplied, his profits soared, and his reputation spread beyond New York. Chicago, Philadelphia, even Havana whispered his name. Maria's life transformed with his. She no longer lived above a tailor shop. She lived in a mansion with black marble floors and gardens that smelled of roses and gasoline. Her wardrobe was filled with Parisian dresses. Her fingers glittered with diamonds that caught the moonlight when she raised a glass at his dinner parties. But beneath the glamour, there was always an unease. She'd see the way men looked at Vincent, not as a leader, but as a god they feared. Even his closest associates, Salvatore Greco, Anthony Bellini, and Carlo Marchetti, spoke with reverence when he wasn't in the room, as if uttering his name too loudly might summon something dark. Maria often wondered if Vincent could feel the isolation that came with his throne. The way he'd stare out the window late at night, smoke curling from his cigarette, his reflection fractured against the glass. Sometimes he'd speak, low and distant. "Every man wants power, Maria, but no one tells you what it costs to keep it." She'd ask him, "And what does it cost you?" He never answered. His rise continued like a storm that refused to end. In 1933, when Prohibition finally fell, most bootleggers crumbled under new laws and lost profits. But Vincent had planned ahead. He diversified: nightclubs, hotels, construction, even politics. He poured money into campaigns, bought influence like others bought cigars, and soon his reach extended from the waterfront to City Hall. Maria watched from the sidelines, equal parts proud and terrified. At charity galas, he played the gentleman philanthropist, donating to churches, funding hospitals, kissing the hands of bishops. But behind the velvet curtain, his men were breaking bones, collecting debts, making rivals disappear. It was a double life, and Maria had become part of it. The perfect wife, the polished smile, the woman who knew everything but said nothing. She wasn't naive anymore. She knew what paid for her silk gowns, what bought her champagne. She told herself love made it worth it, that she could save him from his darkness if she stayed, but power doesn't share. And Vincent's world was built on taking, never giving. One night, a rival crew ambushed one of Vincent's liquor shipments. They shot 2 of his men and hijacked a truck near Red Hook. It was small, but to Vincent, it was a declaration of war. Maria woke in the middle of the night to find him standing in their bedroom, buttoning his vest. Gun holstered at his side. "Don't," she whispered, sitting up. "Let the police handle it." He turned to her with a look that froze her blood. "The police work for me, but they can't send a message like I can." When he returned hours later, his hands were clean, but his soul was not. She could smell it, the gunpowder, the gasoline, the faint trace of smoke that clung to his suit. He sat beside her and said nothing. The silence between them was heavier than any argument. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. From that night on, she knew the man she loved was gone. In his place stood a king. By 1935, Vincent Rizzo was untouchable. His empire stretched across 5 boroughs and beyond. He owned judges, bribed senators, and silenced anyone who dared cross him. To the public, he was the polished businessman who brought jobs and stability during hard times. But in the underworld, he was il capo dei capi, the boss of bosses. Maria stood by his side through it all, her love tested but unbroken. When they appeared together at events, People saw beauty and power, never realizing the cracks beneath. Behind closed doors, she begged him to stop, to leave before it consumed them both. But Vincent would only smile and kiss her forehead. "This city needs me," he'd whisper. "You need me," and maybe he was right. Maybe she did, because by then, Maria Rizzo wasn't just the Kingpin's bride. She was part of his legend. The girl from Little Palermo who became the queen of New York's underworld. And like every queen who sat beside a throne built on sin, she had no idea how soon it would all begin to crumble. By 1936, Vincent Rizzo's empire was more than power. It was legend. His name carried weight in every corner of New York, from the marble offices of politicians to the smoky corners of underground clubs. The Rizzo family didn't just rule the city's underworld. They shaped it, molded it, and painted it in blood and gold. Maria used to think of power as something glorious, almost divine. But living beside Vincent taught her it was something else entirely: cold, unpredictable, hungry. Every day it demanded a sacrifice, and Vincent never hesitated to give it one. Their mansion on Staten Island stood like a fortress overlooking the harbor. From her balcony, Maria could see the ships docking at the Rizzo-controlled piers, each one carrying shipments that would fill his coffers: whiskey, guns, silk, and sometimes darker things. Men came and went through the gates like waves: lieutenants, fixers, messengers. Each one bowed before her husband, as if kneeling before a god. Inside the mansion, opulence reigned. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over mahogany floors. Italian paintings watched from the walls with cold, knowing eyes. The air always smelled faintly of cigars, perfume, and danger. Maria moved through it all like a ghost queen, beautiful, untouchable, but always watching. Vincent had everything: wealth beyond counting, a private army of loyal men, and political connections that kept him immune from justice. Judges owed him favors, cops feared his name, and city officials lined up to shake his hand at charity galas. But the higher he climbed, the more enemies he made. It started quietly: rumors of discontent among his lieutenants. Men like Carlo Marchetti, who thought Vincent had grown too powerful, too reckless. Others whispered that he'd forgotten the old code of honor, that he ruled not with loyalty, but with fear. Maria heard these whispers at dinners, in half-finished sentences, in the way men looked away when Vincent entered the room. She told herself it was jealousy, but deep down she knew better. Power never sleeps, and those who serve it are always waiting for the moment it slips. Vincent's control stretched far beyond New York. Through a network of partners, he ran operations in Chicago, Miami, even Havana. The Rizzos had investments in casinos, shipping lines, and movie studios. Newspapers called him the gentleman Kingpin, the mobster who dressed like royalty and killed like poetry. But behind that polished image was something darker, something Maria saw in the quiet moments. When the mask slipped and she glimpsed the man beneath, he'd sit by the window late at night, staring at the harbor lights with a glass of scotch in hand. His shoulders were tense, his expression distant. Sometimes he'd murmur names: men who'd betrayed him, men who'd disappeared. And sometimes he'd just whisper, "They'll all come for me eventually." Maria would press her hand to his, trying to bring him back. "Then let them come," she'd say softly. "You've already won," but he'd only smile, that sad, dangerous smile. In this life, winning just means you die last. Despite the tension, the Rizzo's reign had moments of grandeur that belonged in fairy tales. Lavish parties filled their mansion, music echoing through gilded halls, champagne flowing like water, guests dressed in pearls and tuxedos. Politicians, movie stars, businessmen, all came to bask in Vincent's glow. Maria would glide through the crowd beside him, her emerald gown catching every eye. To the world, she was perfection, the devoted wife, the untouchable beauty, the woman who'd tamed the devil. But behind every smile was a secret. Behind every toast, a shadow. She'd overhear men laughing about deals sealed with blood, about disappearances that no one dared to question. She'd see the way Vincent's men tightened around him like wolves guarding their alpha, and when the music stopped and the guests left, she'd walk through the empty halls, feeling like she was living in a kingdom built on sand. Still, she loved him. That was the cruelest part. She loved the man who had turned the city into his chessboard. She loved the way he touched her hand at dinner, The way he whispered her name when the world was asleep. Love and fear had become indistinguishable, tangled together like the roots of a dying tree. Then came the Serrano incident. It began as a business dispute. At least that's what the paper said. A minor crime family, the Serranos, tried to muscle into Rizzo territory in Queens. They hijacked one of his trucks, thinking Vincent wouldn't notice. He noticed Maria woke one morning to find him gone. By nightfall, she heard what happened. The Serrano family compound went up in flames. 14 men dead. 2 women, 3 children unaccounted for. The fire department called it an accident. Everyone else called it a message. That night, Maria confronted him. She stood in the doorway of his study as he poured himself another drink. "Was it you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Vincent didn't turn around. "What difference does it make?" "Children, Vincent," she whispered. There were children. He looked over his shoulder then, his eyes cold as the ocean. They were Serranos. Maria's heart cracked. "You're not God." "No," he said softly. "God forgives." "I don't." The silence that followed stretched like a blade between them. She realized in that moment that love couldn't save him, and maybe it couldn't save her either. After the Serrano fire, the city changed. People spoke Vincent's name only in whispers. Rivals fell silent. The press stopped printing rumors. Fear ruled, and Vincent thrived in its shadow. But the empire had begun to rot from within. Salvatore Greco, his oldest ally, started meeting with federal agents. Anthony Bellini began skimming money from the Havana operations. Even his trusted accountant disappeared one night with ledgers that could destroy everything. Vincent's paranoia grew. He stopped sleeping, stopped trusting anyone. He installed guards in every hallway, kept a pistol under his pillow, and rarely left the mansion without an escort. Maria saw what it was doing to him. The once confident king now looked over his shoulder every hour. His smile became a weapon, his kindness a trap. And yet, to the outside world, he was untouchable. Newspapers still printed photos of Vincent and Maria at charity balls. The caption beneath read, "New York's golden couple." They didn't see the cracks in the gold. They didn't see the fear in her eyes when he touched her face, or the way she'd flinch at the sound of gunfire echoing in the distance. For every enemy Vincent silenced, another took their place. Every deal he struck brought him closer to the edge. And every night, Maria prayed for a miracle, that something, someone, would pull them out of the storm before it swallowed them whole. But deep down, she knew the truth. The empire Vincent Rizzo built wasn't meant to last. It was too vast, too ruthless, too soaked in sin. It would collapse, as all empires do, not from the outside, but from within. And when it did, Maria would be there to watch the king she loved fall from his throne. By 1938, the Rizzo Empire stood at its peak and at the edge of ruin. To the world, Vincent still appeared invincible, the refined king of crime whose power reached from City Hall to Havana's sun-soaked casinos. But to those inside his circle, cracks were showing. His lieutenants spoke in half-whispers, his men watched each other with suspicion, and the once flawless machine that had built his fortune began to grind and falter. Maria could feel the change in the air. The house no longer felt alive. It felt haunted. There were too many guards in the hallways now, too many shadows on the walls. The grand piano in the salon gathered dust. The laughter that once echoed through their parties had been replaced by the low hum of silence and fear. Vincent no longer smiled like he used to. His charm, that effortless magnetism that had once drawn people like moths to flame, was replaced with a hard edge. His temper came quickly and often. He shouted more, drank more, trusted less. Maria tried to reach him, tried to remind him of the man he once was. But each time she did, he'd turn those cold gray eyes on her and say, "You think you understand what this life costs? You don't. You never will." And maybe he was right. One night, Maria woke to the sound of muffled voices outside the bedroom door. She crept out, her silk robe brushing against the floor. Down the corridor, the faint golden light from Vincent's office spilled through the doorway. Inside, she saw him with 2 men she didn't recognize. Their suits were fine, but their faces were tense. She watched from the shadows. Vincent was standing behind his desk, a cigarette burning between his fingers. "You tell Carlo," he said quietly. "If he wants to test my patience, he can keep pushing. But if he crosses me again, he'll find his body floating in the Hudson." One of the men started to reply, but Vincent cut him off. "No second chances. You know the rules. Maria saw it in that moment. The fear in their eyes, the exhaustion in his. Power wasn't feeding him anymore. It was devouring him. When the men left, Vincent leaned over his desk, breathing hard. Maria stepped into the room. He looked up sharply, startled. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," she said softly. "You're tearing yourself apart." He let out a bitter laugh. "I've been torn apart since the day I took the crown." She crossed the room and placed a hand on his arm. "Then give it up, Vincent. Walk away, before it destroys you." He stared at her for a long time. Then he said something she'd never forget. "Walk away? You don't walk away from the devil, Maria. You dance until the music stops." As the months passed, the music began to fade. The federal government had finally turned its gaze toward the Rizzos. Investigations were underway: tax evasion, racketeering, bribery. Vincent's name surfaced in whispers and reports. His political allies began to distance themselves, pretending they'd never known him. The same men who had toasted him at parties now refused to take his calls. Maria saw the headlines each morning. Grand jury eyes alleged crime syndicate. She'd fold the papers quickly, hiding them from sight. But Vincent didn't need to read them. He already knew. He began sending his men to silence witnesses, to destroy evidence. The paranoia spread like a disease through the ranks. Men disappeared overnight. Safe houses burned. Friends turned into informants. Then came the betrayal that changed everything. Salvatore Greco, Vincent's oldest ally, his brother in blood, was found dead in his car, 2 bullets in the skull. The papers called it a mob hit, but the street said something else. That Greco had turned informant, and Vincent himself had ordered the execution. Maria didn't want to believe it. She asked him directly one night as rain lashed against the windows. "Was it you?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, his reflection flickering in the glass. Finally he said, "He made his choice. So did I, that was all. No remorse, no justification, just the cold truth of survival." Maria walked away without another word. In that silence, she realized something had changed inside her. The love that once blinded her was fading, replaced by a hollow ache. She had watched the man she loved become a ghost, trapped in a world of his own making. The Rizzo's enemies smelled blood. Rival families circled like vultures ready to strike. The Bellinis, the Mancusos, the Serrano remnants, all sought revenge. Shootings broke out across the city. Car bombs, drive-bys, ambushes in alleyways. New York was bleeding, and Vincent was the reason why. Maria couldn't take it anymore. She begged him to leave. "Let's go to Italy," she pleaded. "We have enough to start over." "Please, Vincent." "I'm scared." He looked at her almost tenderly. "You think they'd ever let me leave?" "This city is my kingdom, Maria, my curse. I die here one way or another. Then what about me?" she whispered. He took her hand, pressing it against his chest. "You're the only good thing I ever did. Don't let them take that away from me." Tears filled her eyes. "Then let me save what's left of you." But he only shook his head. "There's nothing left to save." In the spring of 1939, the walls finally began to close in. Federal agents raided one of his warehouses on the docks, seizing ledgers, weapons, and 2 men who immediately started talking. The newspapers exploded with headlines about the Rizzo Syndicate. Vincent's mansion became a fortress. Guards doubled, gates locked. He stopped attending parties, stopped going out in public. Maria barely recognized him now. His once perfect suits hung looser on his frame. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His eyes, those sharp, commanding eyes, looked tired. One night he came to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "go to my brother in Naples. He'll take care of you." She shook her head. "Don't talk like that." "I'm serious, Maria." His voice broke slightly. "They're coming for me. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But they're coming." She tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away. "I built this life out of blood. It's only fair I drown in it." Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and left the room without another word. Maria sat there, frozen. She didn't know it then, but that was the last night they would ever share under the same roof as husband and wife. Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The empire of Vincent Rizzo was dying, and Maria knew there was nothing left to do but watch the storm finally consume the crown. By the time the summer of 1939 bled into fall, Maria Rizzo was no longer a bystander to the empire. She was part of it. The woman who once sat quietly at dinner parties and smiled for photographs was gone. In her place stood a queen made of steel and silence. She had learned that in the world her husband built, softness was a liability and mercy was suicide. When Vincent began losing control of his territories, Maria stepped in. At first it was small things, handling the ledgers, organizing meetings when he couldn't face his men. But soon, she became the one people turned to when they needed decisions. She spoke little, listened more, and when she gave orders, they were followed. The men respected her in a way that frightened even Vincent. They called her La Regina Nera, the Black Queen. She wore black more often now. Black gloves, black dresses, black hats that shadowed her eyes. Her voice was calm, steady, always measured. She had a way of speaking that could soothe or cut depending on what the moment required. Some said she inherited Vincent's fire. Others whispered she had surpassed him, but Maria wasn't seeking power. She was trying to survive the world her love had chained her to. The night she truly became the queen began with a phone call. Vincent was out at one of his clubs on the east side, meeting an associate. Maria was at home, reading by the window, when the phone rang. "Mrs. Rizzo," said a voice she recognized, one of Vincent's lieutenants. His tone was uneven. "There's been an incident." Within an hour, she was in the back of a black Packard speeding through rain-slicked streets. When the car stopped, she saw a crowd gathered outside the Mirage Club. Police lights, smoke, the flash of cameras. Inside, the floor was chaos. Broken glass, blood on the tiles, the metallic scent of gunfire in the air. Vincent sat slumped against the wall, his right shoulder wrapped in a makeshift bandage. 3 men lay dead near the bar, including one of his top captains. "It was Serrano's boys," he growled through gritted teeth. "Came in shooting like animals." Maria knelt beside him. "You need a doctor," he shook his head. "No hospitals. You know the rules." She turned to one of his men. "Get the surgeon to the house now." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. They obeyed instantly. That night, as she cleaned the blood from his arm herself, she realized something vital. Vincent was no longer the man running the empire. He was just the figurehead. The real power, the one keeping the machine alive, was her. And the men saw it too. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and threats disguised as conversations. The Rizzo operation was on the brink of collapse, and Maria refused to let it happen. She summoned the remaining capos to the estate and faced them across the long mahogany table. Vincent sat at the head, pale and distracted, his arm still in a sling. Maria stood behind him, silent at first. The men argued, each trying to protect his territory, his piece of the dying kingdom. The room was thick with tension. Finally, Maria spoke. "Enough." The sound of her voice sliced through the noise. They all turned to her. "You think arguing will save us?" She said, eyes sharp as glass. "The Serranos want war. The feds want Vincent in chains. If you can't work together, you'll be feeding the river before the month's over." One of the older lieutenants sneered. "With respect, Mrs. Rizzo, this business is no place for a woman." She stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time a woman cleans up the mess the men made." Silence. Vincent didn't stop her. He didn't even look up. And that silence was all the permission she needed. From that day forward, Maria became the decision-maker. She restructured routes, cut ties with unreliable partners, and negotiated a fragile peace with the Bellinis. Her ability to read people, to know who would betray her and who could be trusted, saved what was left of the empire. But every victory came at a cost. The more power she took, the more isolated she became. Vincent began to resent her. The man who once adored her now saw her as a reflection of his own failure. He'd drink late into the night, staring at her across the table with a look that mixed admiration and hatred. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, he slammed his glass down and said, "You enjoy this, don't you? Running my life, giving my orders?" Maria met his gaze calmly. "I'm keeping you alive, Vincent," he laughed bitterly. "You're keeping yourself alive. Don't act like you're doing this for me." She wanted to argue, but the truth stopped her. Maybe he was right. Maybe somewhere along the line, her fight for him had become a fight for survival. The city continued to darken around them. The FBI's investigation deepened. More arrests, more raids. The press called it the fall of the Rizzo syndicate. Maria started to prepare for the inevitable. She moved money offshore, arranged for false documents, and began stashing away cash in safe houses across the state. She didn't tell Vincent everything. He was too proud, too unpredictable. But she knew when the final blow came, she had to be ready. One night, she sat in her room counting stacks of money when she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The soft curls were gone, replaced by tight waves pinned into place. The warmth in her eyes had hardened. The little girl from Little Palermo, the one who used to dance, barefoot in her father's tailor shop, was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned to smile while walking through fire. There were still moments, though, fleeting sparks of the old Maria. She would find Vincent asleep in his chair, the glow of the fireplace flickering across his face. For a second, she'd see the man who once took her dancing on the boardwalk, who whispered promises of forever. She'd brush a hand through his hair, remembering what it felt like to love him without fear. But then he'd wake, and the illusion would vanish. "Can't sleep?" He'd mumble. "No." She'd reply softly. "Neither can I." They'd sit in silence, the weight of everything between them pressing down like a ghost that refused to leave. In the underworld, people whispered about Maria's rise. Some called her brilliant, others dangerous, but all agreed on one thing: she had become untouchable. Even the men who hated her feared her. Yet, behind the iron facade, Maria felt herself unraveling. Each night the guilt grew heavier, the blood on her hands, the lies she'd told, the lives she'd destroyed in the name of love and loyalty. She would stare out at the city lights and wonder, when did love turn into this? When did I stop being his wife and become his shadow? The legend of the Rizzo family would forever remember Vincent as the Kingpin, the ruthless architect of an empire built on sin. But those who truly knew the story, the ones who had seen her eyes up close, whispered another truth, that in the final years, it wasn't Vincent who ruled, it was Maria. The Kingpin's bride had become the queen of the underworld, and deep down, she knew there was no escaping the crown she never wanted to wear. It began with whispers, soft, slithering rumors that crept through the dark like smoke from a dying fire. Someone close to the Rizzos was leaking information to the feds. Someone who had sat at their table, drunk their wine, kissed Maria's hand, and sworn loyalty to Vincent. At first, Vincent dismissed it as paranoia. He'd been hearing phantom threats for years. But Maria felt it, an invisible noose tightening around their world. The phone calls became shorter. Meetings grew tenser. Faces that once smiled at them now looked away. Then came the night that shattered whatever peace they had left. It was late, long past midnight. Rain drummed against the windows of the Rizzo mansion, and Maria was alone in their bedroom. Vincent had gone out hours ago to handle something. She tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. The storm outside seemed to echo the one inside her, restless, furious, uncertain. When she finally heard the front doors burst open, she jumped. Voices filled the hall, shouting, footsteps pounding up the stairs. She rushed to the landing just as two of Vincent's men dragged him inside, soaked in rain and blood. His face was pale, his jaw set tight. "What happened?" she cried, running toward him. He didn't answer. One of the men, the youngest, barely more than a boy, spoke through clenched teeth. "It was Tony. He turned on us." Maria froze. Tony DeLuca had been Vincent's right hand for years. He'd stood beside them at their wedding, held their son back when Maria was still young enough to dream of normal things. "He's working with the feds," the man continued. Vin caught him at the docks, handing off the ledger. Vincent's eyes burned. I put a bullet in his head before he could speak another word. The words hung heavy in the air. Maria's breath caught in her throat. "Tony, you killed him?" Vincent said nothing. He pulled off his blood-soaked gloves, tossing them onto the bed. "He was family," he said quietly. "But family doesn't mean what it used to." Maria wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand why every answer was violence, but she didn't. Because deep down, she understood that the moment you love a devil, you accept that mercy doesn't live in his world. That night, she sat by his side as he washed the blood from his hands. It was the same ritual she had witnessed so many times before, but this time it felt different. The crimson stains looked darker under the light, more stubborn. She helped him pull the shirt over his bruised shoulder, her fingers trembling. He caught her wrist. "You're scared of me," he said. She met his eyes. "I'm scared of what you're becoming." He smirked bitterly. You think there's still something left to become? Maria didn't answer. She just looked at him. The man who once made her laugh until she cried, now hollowed out by power and paranoia. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. From exhaustion, the silence between them was suffocating. Finally, she whispered, if you keep killing the people who love you, one day there'll be no one left to bury you. He flinched as if the words had cut deeper than any knife. Then he turned away and said, then it'll be quiet for once. Days passed, but the tension never left. The mansion became a tomb, filled with ghosts and secrets. Maria stopped opening the curtains. She didn't want to see the men standing guard outside, or the cars parked across the street with unseen eyes inside. At night, she'd lie awake, listening to the rain, to the sound of Vincent pacing the halls. She began to notice small things, letters disappearing, phone calls ending the moment she entered a room, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't his, and then, one morning she found the blood. It was there, dark and stark against the white silk sheets. Just a few drops, no more than that. But she knew what it meant. She followed the trail to Vincent's dressing room. The door was half open, and inside she found a revolver sitting on the desk beside a glass of whiskey and an unopened envelope. Vincent, she called softly. He emerged from the shadows, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. His face looked older, like he'd aged 10 years in one sleepless night. Are you going somewhere? She asked. He glanced at the letter but didn't answer. You're scaring me. He took a deep breath, his voice low. The feds got one of the warehouses. They found the books. Her heart dropped. The ledgers? He nodded. The ones Tony didn't destroy. Maria stepped closer. What does that mean? It means it's over, he said quietly. They have enough to put me away for the rest of my life. She shook her head. No, we can still... There's no we anymore, Maria. His tone was soft but final. He poured another drink, his hands trembling slightly as he set the glass down. You're going to leave, he said. Take what you need, go to the house in Naples. I'll have men get you across the border. She felt her throat tighten. And what about you? He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. I built this life with my hands. I'll end it with them too. Maria didn't cry. She couldn't. There were no tears left in her. Instead, she stood still, memorizing his face in that moment. The sharp jawline, the shadow of stubble, the eyes that once melted her and now only mirrored the weight of a dying empire. That night, as the storm raged outside, she sat awake in bed. Vincent lay beside her, silent. The distance between them felt like miles. She wanted to reach out, to tell him she forgave him, that she'd follow him anywhere. But fear chained her to the sheets. Sometime before dawn, she drifted into a restless sleep. When she woke, he was gone. The blood on the silk sheets was the only trace he left behind. Hours later, she heard the explosion. The blast rattled the windows, sent the birds scattering from the trees. The mansion shook. Maria ran to the window and saw smoke rising from the east side of the city. Her heart stopped. That was where Vincent had gone. By the time the news came, she already knew. The papers called it a warehouse accident. The cops called it a gang retaliation. But Maria knew the truth. Vincent Rizzo had gone out the only way he could, on his own terms, with fire and defiance, leaving nothing behind for anyone to claim. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring at the empty pillow beside her. The sheets still smelled like him, gunpowder and whiskey, smoke and regret. She pressed her face into them and whispered, "You got your quiet, Vincent." The tears came then, silent, endless, cleansing. In that moment, Maria Rizzo became more than the Kingpin's bride. She became his ghost, his witness, his final confession written in blood. And as dawn crept through the broken curtains, she realized that love had not saved her. It had destroyed her. Because when you love a man like Vincent Rizzo, you don't escape the fire, you become part of it. The city mourned the death of Vincent Rizzo, though few dared to say his name aloud. His empire, once feared and untouchable, lay in ruins. The newspapers printed his obituary like a ghost story, crime lord killed in warehouse explosion. But those who truly lived in his world knew better. There was no body recovered, no ashes claimed, just smoke, fire, and silence. For Maria Rizzo, that silence was both a curse and a question. She sat alone in the darkened mansion for days, unable to leave, unable to accept the truth. The city outside buzzed with whispers. Some said Vincent was dead, others swore he'd escaped. Maria didn't know which hurt more, the idea of losing him forever, or the haunting possibility that he might still be out there, somewhere in the shadows. Watching her, she wandered through empty rooms filled with ghosts of their life together. The grand piano Vincent had once played for her was covered in dust. The photographs, smiling faces frozen in time, mocked her with their innocence. In the garden, the roses had wilted. Everything that had once been alive seemed to have died with him. But the world didn't stop for grief. The vultures circled immediately. Rival families began carving up what remained of the Rizzo territory. The Bellinis took the docks, the Mancusos seized the casinos, and the Serranos, those serpents who had waited for years, claimed the streets that once bore Vincent's name. Every day, Maria received calls, threats, and offers. They wanted her gone, or worse, under their control. She refused them all. Maria wasn't just the widow of the Kingpin anymore. She was the last symbol of his empire, and symbols in that world carried power. The first to come for her was Don Carlo Bellini, a man who had known Vincent since the old days. He arrived at the mansion in a long black car, wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. "Maria," he said smoothly as he entered her parlor, "you shouldn't be here alone. This house, it's dangerous now. Let me take care of things for you." Maria studied him quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "And what would that care cost me?" He chuckled. "Just an agreement. You give me the territory around the docks, what's left of it, and I'll make sure the rest of the city leaves you in peace." She tilted her head slightly. "And if I say no?" Carlo leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of cigar smoke and arrogance. "Then, Signora, I can't promise your peace will last long." Maria smiled faintly. It was the same calm, knowing smile Vincent once wore before he ended a man's life. "You know what Vincent used to say about promises?" Carlo frowned. "What?" "They're just lies waiting for an opportunity." The sound of a gun cocking filled the room. Two of Maria's guards stepped out from behind the curtains, pistols drawn. Carlo's eyes widened as Maria stood, her voice still soft but deadly. "Tell your men," she said. "The Rizzo name isn't buried yet." Carlo left without another word. The next day, his car was found riddled with bullets on the edge of the harbor. And just like that, Maria had declared war. She didn't want it. God knows she didn't, but she couldn't run, not yet. Every night she dreamed of Vincent standing in the smoke, whispering, "Finish what we started." So she did. Maria called in the remnants of the old crew, those who hadn't fled, those still loyal to the memory of their fallen king. They met in the cellar beneath the mansion, where the air smelled of damp cement and secrets. "This city thinks we're finished," Maria told them. "They think the Rizzos are ghosts, but ghosts can still haunt, and I intend to make them remember who we were." The men nodded, some hesitant, others inspired. None of them dared to look her in the eye for too long. There was something different about her now. A quiet fury, a cold strength that no one could explain. From that night on, the war began. Bodies started turning up in alleys and on riverbanks. Warehouses exploded, shipments vanished, and whispers spread through the underworld like wildfire. The Widow's War, they called it. Some said Maria had gone mad with grief. Others believed she was avenging Vincent's death. Either way, no one could stop her, but the truth was more complicated. Maria wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for redemption. For every bullet fired, she saw Vincent's face. For every enemy that fell, she felt the weight of her sins pressing harder on her soul. She wasn't just at war with the families. She was at war with herself. One night, after a particularly brutal retaliation against the Serranos, Maria returned to the mansion covered in rain and ash. She sat alone in the darkened dining room, a half-empty glass of whiskey trembling in her hand. She stared at the chair across from her, the one where Vincent used to sit. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice, low and teasing. "Whiskey, Maria? You used to hate the stuff," she blinked. The room was empty again. "Am I going mad?" She whispered. Maybe she was. But madness was easier than loneliness. Later that night, as thunder rolled across the sky, she walked into their old bedroom for the first time in weeks. The sheets had been changed, but she still smelled him. Still saw him standing there adjusting his cufflinks, smiling that devil's smile. She touched the headboard, tracing the outline of the initials he'd carved there years ago. V plus M. You promised me forever, she said aloud. You didn't say it would end in flames. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. She barely recognized herself anymore. The hard lines in her face, the sharpness in her eyes. The innocence that once defined Maria Rizzo was gone, yet beneath the armor, something flickered. A fragment of the girl she once was, the one who had fallen in love with the man who owned the night. She poured another drink, her hand steady now. If you wanted me to stop, Vincent, she murmured, you shouldn't have made me learn how to fight. By late 1940, the streets began to quiet again. The war she'd started had burned through everything, the enemies, the allies, the city itself. She had won, but there was nothing left worth ruling. One evening, she stood on the balcony of the mansion, staring out over the glittering skyline. The city looked beautiful from a distance, as if all its sins were washed clean by the rain. A knock came at the door. One of her guards entered, his face pale. "Signora," he said carefully, "there's a man asking for you. Says his name is Vincent." Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "What did you say?" "He says he's Vincent Rizzo, says he's come home." For a long moment she couldn't breathe. Then she whispered, "Bring him to me," when the door opened, and she saw the figure standing in the rain. She almost didn't believe her eyes. He was thinner, older, his face marked by scars and time, but it was him. Vincent Rizzo, the devil himself, returned from hell. Their eyes met. The world seemed to stop. Neither spoke, because both knew whatever love had once bound them was now twisted, blood-stained, and far beyond saving. The rain poured like judgment from the heavens that night, hammering the mansion's marble steps as Vincent Rizzo stepped back into the world he'd once ruled. The guards had frozen at the sight of him, unsure if they were staring at a ghost or a man. Even Maria, standing at the top of the grand staircase, couldn't move at first. She'd dreamed of this moment 1,000 times, his return, his explanation, his embrace, but none of those dreams had prepared her for the truth standing before her. He looked mortal. The man who had once been a god in the underworld was now leaner, paler, his sharp suits replaced by a long black coat soaked through with rain. A faint scar ran down his temple, the only visible mark of whatever hell he'd crawled out of. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most. They were colder than before. "Hello, Maria," Vincent said quietly, his voice carrying through the stillness like a whisper from a grave. For a moment, neither moved. The rain drummed against the windows, filling the silence between them. Then Maria descended the stairs, one slow step at a time, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. "You're supposed to be dead," she said finally. "I was," he replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. For a while, Maria stopped at the final step, standing only inches from him. She searched his face for something, anything of the man she once loved. But she couldn't find it. The Vincent she remembered had been dangerous, yes, but charming, alive. "This man was something else entirely. What happened?" she asked. "Where have you been?" Vincent looked past her, toward the flickering chandelier above the foyer. "Buried," he murmured, "but not deep enough." They moved into the parlor, the same room where she'd once faced down Don Carlo Bellini. Now it felt like an interrogation chamber. Maria poured 2 glasses of whiskey, her hands steadied despite the storm raging inside her. "You faked your death," she said, handing him a glass. Vincent nodded. "It was the only way to end the war." "The war?" Her voice sharpened. "You left me here to clean up your blood, to bury your friends, to fight your enemies, and you call that ending it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of his drink, the amber liquid reflecting the firelight. "I thought it would save you," he said finally. "Save me?" She laughed bitterly. "You think disappearing saved me? You think watching your empire burn while they hunted me saved me?" He looked up, his eyes hardening. "You're still alive, aren't you?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Maria turned away, staring into the fire. The flames twisted and cracked, their shadows dancing across her face. "You don't get to come back here and act like a savior," she said softly. "You were gone, Vincent. You left me to become the devil they all feared. I made you strong," he said. "You made me cold," she whispered. The truth was, Vincent hadn't planned to return. Not like this. But something in him had shifted in the years he spent in hiding, watching from the outskirts, unseen, while his world unraveled. He'd been betrayed, burned, hunted, left for dead by his own allies. The explosion that was supposed to kill him had been a setup, the Serranos. They had played both sides, feeding information to the feds while pretending to be loyal. And when Vincent realized the extent of their betrayal, it was already too late. His only option had been to vanish, to let them believe he was gone while he quietly gathered the pieces of his revenge. But in doing so, he had lost everything else. Now, standing in front of Maria again, he realized the cost. "You did well," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You held the empire together." Maria turned, her expression unreadable. "No," she said. "I burned it down." He studied her face. There was a hardness there now, a calm deadliness he'd never seen before. She had become a reflection of him, and that terrified him more than any rival could. "What did you do, Maria?" he asked. "What you taught me to do," she said. "Survive." As the hours passed, their conversation shifted between anger and silence, between old love and new distrust. The storm outside had turned the night into a blur of lightning and wind, and the world seemed to shrink to the confines of that room. "Do you still love me?" he asked suddenly. Maria didn't answer right away. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "I don't know," she said. "The man I loved died in that explosion. The one sitting in front of me. I don't know who he is." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I'm still him." "No," she said softly. "You're what's left of him." Later, after the arguments had quieted, Vincent stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I didn't come back for forgiveness," he said. "I didn't think you did. I came back for vengeance." Maria looked up sharply. "Vengeance? On who?" "The Serranos," he said, his voice low, almost growling. "They took everything from me, from us. I'm going to take it all back." Maria's heart sank. She knew that tone, that obsession. It was the same darkness that had consumed him before, the same hunger that had destroyed their lives once already. "You can't win that war, Vincent," she said. "Not anymore. Too much has changed." "Then I'll change it back." She stepped closer, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "You'll die trying." He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw the madness flickering behind his calm. "Then I'll die doing what I was born for." That night, long after he'd gone to the guest room, Maria sat alone in the parlor again. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers glowing in the dark. She could hear him moving upstairs, pacing, planning, already lost to whatever war he was conjuring in his head. And she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. Vincent Rizzo hadn't returned from the dead. He'd brought death with him. The next morning, as sunlight struggled through the gray clouds, Maria stood in the doorway watching him prepare to leave. He was already dressed in black again, already slipping back into the armor of the man he used to be. "Where will you go?" she asked. "South," he said. "The Serranos have a villa near Havana." "I'll start there. You're walking back into the fire." He smiled faintly. "That's where I belong." She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Vincent, if you go, there's no coming back this time." He paused, then kissed her hand softly. "Then remember me as I was, not as I'll become." And with that, he turned and walked out into the morning rain. Maria stood there for a long time, watching the black car disappear down the drive. For the first time in years, she felt tears on her cheeks. The devil had returned to his kingdom, and this time he wasn't coming back for love. The streets of New York had changed in the years since Vincent Rizzo had disappeared. What was once his kingdom had become a war zone, a city carved up by factions, each trying to claim a piece of the empire he had built with blood and cunning. And now, with Vincent returned, the storm that had been quietly gathering was ready to explode. Maria watched from the safety of the mansion, her eyes scanning the city skyline from the balcony. Smoke rose from the east side, where Serrano operatives had taken control of the docks. Fires burned in abandoned warehouses. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but they were too late, too slow, too irrelevant. Vincent had begun his campaign of vengeance immediately, moving through the shadows with the precision of a predator. The Serranos' allies vanished overnight, bodies left as messages on doorsteps and in alleyways. Explosions rocked the waterfront. The city didn't know if they were watching a man or a ghost, but they feared both. Maria should have been terrified. She was, but she was also exhilarated. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a dark poetry in the way the city obeyed their will. She had seen Vincent at his worst, and yet, watching him now, she understood why people had once called him the devil. Inside the mansion, Maria and Vincent worked together as they had never done before. Maps of the city were spread across the dining room table. Men and women loyal to the Rizzo name sat around them, taking orders, relaying information, planning the next strike. "Carlo Bellini thinks he can take the docks?" Vincent asked, his voice sharp, eyes scanning the map. "He underestimates you," Maria replied, tracing the route of a supply shipment. "We can cut them off before it even reaches the piers." Vincent nodded, then paused, looking at her with that old fire in his eyes, the fire that had drawn her to him years ago. "You've changed," he said quietly. "So have you," she replied. The exchange was brief but charged with the electricity of shared history, shared blood. They had become something more than lovers, more than partners. They were war strategists, commanders of an army fueled by grief, rage, and memory. The campaign didn't wait for their permission. Night after night, explosions lit the sky. Gunfire echoed through alleyways, and the city seemed to tremble under the weight of their return. Vincent moved like a shadow, striking with precision, leaving chaos in his wake. Maria coordinated the logistics, ensuring that every shipment, every route, every ally remained loyal. But as the nights wore on, Maria began to notice something disturbing. Vincent was changing. The man who had once loved her, who had shared quiet nights and whispered promises, was disappearing beneath the mask of vengeance. His laughter vanished. His smiles became rare. His eyes hardened, sharper than the knives he used against his enemies. She tried to confront him one night as he returned to the mansion, soaked in rain and blood. "Vincent," she said, her voice trembling, "this isn't you. You're not the man I love anymore." He didn't answer immediately. He set his coat down, cleaned his weapons silently. Finally he said, "Maria, that man died when the explosion took me away. The man you loved. He's gone." Her heart tightened. "Then what are you becoming?" He didn't look at her. "Survival, power, justice. Call it what you want, but it's all that's left." As weeks passed, the war escalated. The city's underworld was ablaze. Factions that had once opposed each other joined forces against the Rizzos. Bombs detonated in public places, leaving carnage in their wake. Politicians and police scrambled, but the chaos was orchestrated so skillfully that they could never predict the next strike. Maria often wondered if Vincent even realized how far he had fallen. She saw the obsession in his eyes, the need to destroy anyone who had betrayed him, the refusal to show mercy, the constant calculating of the next move. He had become a man consumed by vengeance, and in the process, he was consuming everything he loved. One evening, she followed him to the docks, watching as he confronted a group of Serrano soldiers. The night was black, lit only by the orange glow of burning crates. Vincent moved like a phantom, taking down enemies with cold precision. Blood sprayed across the wooden planks, and screams echoed into the water. Maria felt a sick thrill in her chest, but it was tainted with fear. Fear that this man, the devil she had once loved, would not survive the fire he had set. The turning point came when the federal authorities finally intervened. They had been patient, watching the war unfold, collecting evidence, mapping alliances. By the time they moved, it was too late. Vincent and Maria had anticipated the raid. The mansion became a fortress. The Rizzo's men were ready, and for a brief moment, victory seemed possible. But victory always comes with a price. During the raid, a grenade exploded near the east wing, sending shards of glass and wood into the hallway. Vincent shielded Maria, taking a deep gash across his arm. Blood streamed down his sleeve, but he continued to fight, to command, to survive. Maria screamed, running to him, but he pushed her back. "Stay alive," he shouted. "Don't let them take you." The chaos lasted hours. When the dust settled, several of Vincent's closest allies were dead, and the mansion was damaged beyond recognition. Yet Vincent and Maria remained, bloodied, exhausted, but unbroken. It was in that moment Maria understood the truth. They were no longer just fighting for power. They were fighting for survival. The city around them was burning, but within the mansion, a strange calm settled. Vincent sat in a chair, his coat torn, his face streaked with blood and sweat. Maria knelt beside him, cleaning the wounds, tending to the injuries with trembling hands. "You should rest," she said softly. "I can't," he replied. "Not yet. Not until it's over." She looked at him, realizing that the man she loved, or had loved, was gone. What remained was a soldier, a king, a devil reborn from the ashes of his own empire. "Vincent," she whispered, placing her hand on his cheek. "Promise me something. When this is done, whatever happens, don't lose yourself completely." He looked at her, eyes dark, and nodded slowly. "I'll try." But Maria knew better. She had watched the fire consume him once, and fire always returned. The final battle of the Rizzo War came at dawn. The Serranos had gathered their forces, thinking the Kingpin and his bride were weakened, broken. They underestimated the ferocity that grief and vengeance could create. Vincent led the charge, moving through streets and warehouses with Maria at his side. Every move was precise, every strike calculated. Their enemies fell before them, but every victory left scars on the city, on their men, and on their souls. By the time the sun rose, the war had ended. The Serranos were destroyed. The other families fled, cowed by the display of violence and ruthlessness. The city was silent again, save for the crackling fires that still burned in abandoned buildings. Maria looked around, her chest heaving. They had survived. But at what cost? Vincent collapsed into her arms, exhausted, battered, bloodied. She held him, feeling the weight of everything that had passed. The empire they had fought so hard to reclaim was gone. But the bond they shared, twisted, dark, and unbreakable, remained. And in that moment, Maria realized that surviving the war didn't mean they were free. It meant they had become the very monsters the world feared. The war was over. The city lay in quiet ruin, smoke curling from the remnants of battle, windows shattered, streets cracked with the scars of violence. The Rizzo name had survived, but at a cost that no one could measure. Maria stood at the balcony of the mansion, watching the sunrise paint the skyline in pale gold, the first light of peace mingling with the lingering ash of chaos. Vincent Rizzo, the devil she had fallen in love with, was beside her. The man she once knew, the charismatic, dangerous, intoxicating force of the underworld, was still alive, still standing. But she could see the lines etched into his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, the subtle trembling of a hand that had once held death like a lover. They didn't speak immediately. Words would have been useless, inadequate for all that had passed. Instead, they stood together in silence, the wind carrying the scent of smoke, rain, and the city that had tried to devour them both. Finally, Maria spoke. "It's over," she said softly. Vincent didn't respond at first. He just looked at her, eyes dark and unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "For now," he said. "But peace. Peace is a fragile thing. You know that." Maria turned to face him, her expression both weary and resolute. "I know, but we survived. That's something, isn't it?" He gave a small, rueful smile. "Survived, yes. But at what cost, Maria?" She didn't answer immediately. She thought about the friends they had lost, the lives they had destroyed, the blood they had spilled. She thought about the nights of fear, the nights of fire, the nights when she had held him and prayed he would return from hell itself. "Love comes at a cost," she said finally, "and we paid it." Vincent stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "And yet, I would do it all again." Maria felt the familiar pull in her chest, the same dangerous, intoxicating pull that had drawn her to him years ago. But she also felt something new, an understanding of the darkness, a recognition that love and survival in their world were inseparable. "You would?" she asked, a trace of disbelief in her voice. He nodded. "Every time. Because it's worth it. Because you're worth it." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of release. They had survived the fire, the bloodshed, the betrayals, and the horrors of the underworld. They had emerged scarred, changed, but alive. And in that survival, they had found each other again, not as naive lovers, but as warriors who had weathered the storm together. Days passed, and the city slowly began to breathe again. The other families had retreated, cowed by the ruthless display of power that Maria and Vincent had orchestrated. The police tried to rebuild their cases, but the trail of chaos left by the Rizzos was nearly impossible to untangle. In the shadows, whispers of the Kingpin and his bride became legend, stories told with awe, fear, and fascination. Maria moved through the mansion with a careful grace, her presence commanding but quiet. She oversaw the repairs, the accounting, the logistics of what remained of their operations. Vincent, though still powerful, had begun to rely on her more than ever. Their partnership had evolved from love and desire into strategy and survival, a perfect blend of intellect, instinct, and raw willpower. One night, they sat together in the parlor, the fire low, the mansion quiet for the first time in months. Maria poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Vincent. He took it silently, their fingers brushing, a small but potent reminder of the connection that had always bound them. "To surviving hell," she said, raising her glass. "To surviving hell," he echoed. Clinking his glass against hers, they drank in silence, letting the warmth of the alcohol seep into their bones, letting the firelight dance across their faces, illuminating scars and memories alike. But peace, even in their world, was never absolute. Even as they rebuilt, Maria could sense the undercurrents of danger. Old allies tested boundaries, minor betrayals flickered like sparks in the dark, and the shadows of the past lingered, threatening to engulf them. She had learned the hard way that trust was a currency more fragile than gold in the world they inhabited. Vincent understood that instinctively. The man she had loved, the devil she had married, was never fully at ease, never fully human. But Maria had changed him, subtly, irrevocably. He had learned to temper his rage, to measure his strikes, to recognize the value of loyalty beyond fear. And she had learned that love in their world required the same ruthlessness, the same precision, the same courage that had kept them alive. Together, they were unstoppable. One afternoon, Maria walked through the mansion's gardens, Vincent at her side. The roses had begun to bloom again, a reminder that life could grow even after fire. She traced her fingers along the petals, feeling the softness, the fragile beauty that existed despite the brutality that had defined their lives. "Do you ever think about leaving it all behind?" she asked quietly, not looking at him. Vincent paused, his eyes on the horizon where the city stretched endlessly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But this city, this empire, it's in our blood. We can't walk away." "Not entirely," Maria nodded. "Then we continue. We survive, and we protect each other." He smiled, a small, rare smile that warmed her heart. "Always." And in that moment she realized something profound. Love in their world wasn't about tenderness or safety. It was about standing together in the fire, watching everything burn around them, and still choosing each other every single day. The years that followed were quieter, but no less dangerous. The Rizzo Empire rebuilt itself, smaller but more efficient, more loyal than ever. Maria and Vincent ruled not just through fear but through respect and strategy. Their names became synonymous with the Underworld's power and intelligence. Legends whispered about the bride who had survived hell and the devil who had returned from the ashes. They were feared. They were revered. They were untouchable, and yet in the quiet moments, when the mansion was empty, the city asleep, and the firelight flickered across the walls, Maria and Vincent found themselves alone, sitting together in silence, sharing a drink, sharing a memory, sharing the fragile remnants of a love that had survived everything. "You know," Maria said softly one night, "I never thought we'd make it this far." Vincent took her hand, holding it tightly. "Neither did I," he said. "But we did, and we always will." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and the weight of the man she had loved, lost, and found again. "Forever," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head, the smallest of gestures but filled with all the meaning that words could never hold. "Forever," he echoed. Outside, the city slept. Inside, 2 survivors of a violent, unforgiving world found solace in each other. They had been through fire, blood, and betrayal. They had loved and lost, killed and mourned. And yet, in the end, they remained, stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Maria Rizzo, the bride of the devil, and Vincent Rizzo, the man who had returned from death itself, had claimed their destiny. They were not just survivors. They were legends. And as long as they had each other, nothing, neither time nor death, Neither betrayal nor war could destroy what they had built together. The story of Maria Rizzo and Vincent Rizzo ended not with a gunshot or an explosion, but with a quiet understanding that love, in the darkest corners of the world, could survive. That loyalty, courage, and intelligence could carve out a kingdom even in the ruins of chaos. That the bride and the devil, against all odds, had endured, and so, in the shadow of a city that had tried to devour them, they stood together. Imperfect, scarred, unstoppable, because when you survive the devil never leaves your side.